Welcome to Passionate World Talk Radio. Educate, enlighten, entertain.
Welcome to Creative Psychotherapy, produced by Passionate World Talk Radio. Creative Psychotherapy represents a forum to be able to explore an array of research that discusses interventions and that is focused on the treatment of psychological issues. I'm your host, Audrey O'Neill. I'm a psychotherapist based in New York. In today's episode, I will be exploring the integration of spirituality into the practice of psychotherapy. In the United States, the field of psychology has placed the Western tradition at the forefront. And at the same time, the field of psychology has been evolving to the extent that the inclusion of other diverse traditions and belief systems, apart from the Western tradition, have been explored toward developing an implementation in the interest of building cultural sensitivity. These ideas are drawn from the work of Ocampo, Pugliese, and Gloria in 2014. They also pointed out that integrating the client's worldviews is critical in realizing more positive outcomes. Even in light of a movement toward providing diverse clients with services that are appropriate and point to multicultural competence, spirituality has been left out and neglected. Further, in terms of diversity, spirituality is an important and critical focus in the field of psychology, broadly speaking. But its integration into psychotherapy in particular is essential because the impact it can have on the quality of life of the client is very important. I wanted to begin with Latino spirituality. For example, our Mexican tradition called curanderismo, which encompasses holistic healing, as well as santeria, which is grounded in the tenets of Catholic faith, blended with African spiritism. For many Latinos, in light of a cultural tradition, spirituality acts as a way to cope with adversity. For example, Latinos prefer working with healers of their native traditions, even when access to Western medicine is accessible to them. In some of the research that I've read, in some of the studies, clinicians with a university degree who are also licensed to provide psychotherapy to persons undergoing psychological distress or a disorder have taken this into consideration. There were several clinicians that were interviewed that derived from Latin America, and most of these served in outpatient clinics among Spanish-speaking clients in the Midwest. The clinicians who worked with an array of diagnostic issues also indicated that there is a greater likelihood of demonstrating credibility to the interviewers, both when they took into consideration their spiritual tradition and when they spoke their native language. And this has important clinical implications. For example, the clinician's narrative showed evidence of a spiritual perspective in connection with the spiritual guides that the clinician believed influenced their therapeutic work. Also, assessing their belief systems in connection with their spirit guides prior to and working with the client appeared to be very important. Some of these studies help to support that psychologists, in expanding their understanding about how their belief systems influence their work with clients, is key. In a study by Arseniski, Morrow, Englar, Carlson in 2016, among the rationales proposed for the integration of spirituality and psychotherapy would be its association to the practice of multicultural competence. Spirituality encompasses the individual's identity and worldview. And they cited an example relating to how culturally diverse groups who are connected to the healing practices of indigenous people often feel a sense of alienation among clinicians who cultivate a rejecting attitude towards spirituality. The writers asserted that ethical practice includes religious and spiritual competence. Their study represented the first of its kind that provided an explanation about how therapists integrate spirituality in their work with youth, and it also represented a qualitative, exploratory, grounded theory study. In terms of the method used, they pointed out their approaches based on the experience of the therapist in exploring how they integrated spirituality in their therapeutic work. A total of 11 therapists participated in the study and had been engaged in spiritual integrative therapy. Most of the participants discussed assisting youth in developing resiliency they developed through the practice of spirituality for the purpose of increasing hope in connection with faith in a higher power. Some participants said they employed metaphors from Scripture and used mind-body connection as well as symbols for a connection with ancestors. This demonstrates that the therapist integrated a variety of tools drawn from diverse cultures to engage youth. In another study, Servants and Parham noted that the training that therapists receive in graduate school is often lengthy. However, much of the training based within the context of the Western tradition. Therefore, there is limited knowledge available with regard to the application of it with people of color. And this holds especially true in considerations of spirituality. They contended that practitioners are required to examine the association between ethnicity and culture, racism as well as gender, sexual orientation, and disability in terms of understanding the client's worldviews. They noted that practitioners of color who understand the importance of the role of the extended family in providing a sense of community realize that including the influence of family and community is essential in the care of the patient. Within the therapeutic relationship, having an understanding about how a patient interacts with oppression might also help provide insight into accessing the patient's nature with regard to spirituality. These researchers contended that it is manifested through how an individual copes with adversity and experiences transformation that defines the individual's spirituality. Hence, it becomes essential for therapists to explore these experiences with the patient to gain a better understanding about their lives. There is also an acknowledgement that a rise in interest about the exploration of spirituality in the psychological treatment of veterans of the military has been noted. Further, this research has not examined the veterans' preferences about the variety of ways therapists approach veterans who consider spirituality and treatment important. In light of the fact that 1 in 5 veterans were open to integrating spirituality into treatment, the researchers noted therapy should be receptive to the approach, although they also acknowledged that more research is required. Those veterans who were receptive tended to derive from ethnic minority groups, those who were afflicted by a moral injury, or those who were religious in nature. Research findings indicated that religiously integrative cognitive behavioral treatment were more effective. And the findings also suggested that spirituality integrated practices should be person-centered and exploratory in nature in order to allow veterans to work at their own pace rather than take a directive approach. Spirituality can also be employed in order to support treatment. Frederick, 2014, noted one of the ingredients of integrating spirituality in treatment consists of gaining an understanding of the client's preference. He mentioned the most important piece of the puzzle is taking into consideration the client's worldview. Frederick argued that the worldview is inherent in spirituality, and treatment can then be developed using culturally sensitive approaches. In another study, it was acknowledged that the research undertaken about spirituality and psychotherapy has focused more on clinicians rather than on clients. Glockel in 2011 explained that clients experiencing psychological distress or other physical problems access spirituality for the purpose of coping and have a desire to have their spiritual needs addressed in therapy and are eager to talk about their spiritual concerns. In the study, a narrative method was used. As research of this nature is based on the idea that people make meaning out of events through stories constructed that focus on experiences. The sample consisted of 12 people recruited using a listserv and posters in a spiritual bookstore that were based in Vancouver, British Columbia, and Canada. 11 out of the 12 described themselves as spiritual and non-religious, while the remaining persons observed Zen Buddhism. 11 out of the 12 acknowledged they had been seeking therapists that employed spirituality. They viewed the individual as composed of several aspects of the self, such as physical, emotional, and spiritual. They also described that they felt each aspect of the self must be addressed in order for healing to be realized. They viewed the therapist who had the capacity to reflect their feelings and experiences as also being effective in helping to facilitate the process of spiritual development and change. These findings indicated the need that exists for some clients to explore all aspects of themselves with an empathetic and culturally sensitive therapist. In another qualitative research study which examined how Southeast Asian clinicians respond to culturally rooted spiritual experience discussed by their Southeast Asian clients, it was critical for clinicians to have training in spiritual beliefs that are culturally based in order to avoid a misdiagnosis. Nigay in 2014 gave an example of the experiences called ghost pushes you down, as described in a Cambodian community, and how this could be understood as being pathological or similar to a panic attack or hallucinations. In the study, 5 focus groups were created, which made up 5 to 6 people in each group, derived from several Cambodian and Vietnamese communities. They were clinicians and counselors in behavioral health settings and worked with clients of the same background for at least 2 years. The findings of the study indicated that the client's spiritual experiences that are culturally based can be viewed as strengths that can increase well-being or as pathology, depending on the interpretation of the clinician. If a clinician, for example, views the client's experience as a problem, they may attempt to change their client's beliefs or challenge it by educating them. However, in order to be culturally sensitive, it's important to carefully examine biases. In another study by Van Gordon and Griffiths in 2014, the researchers contended that there appears to be a high interest in Buddhist-derived interventions in the West. The interventions can be applied to a number of psychological disorders, such as substance abuse, mood disorders, anxiety, as well as schizophrenia and personality disorders. Buddhist-derived interventions can also increase well-being and improve emotional regulation. As such, Buddhist ideas have found their way into many clinical interventions. At the same time, a sense of confusion has arisen in terms of the understanding of used in Buddhist principles. It was noted that the term insight, as it relates to Buddhism, has a different meaning than Western clinicians have come to understand. In Buddhist terms, insight refers to transcendence with regard to the nature of reality. As a result of this confusion regarding terminology, it was understood that communication between Buddhist teachers and clinicians to adopt more of what was termed more unity in structure in the interest of integrating Buddhist practice and clinical work. And this was key for the clinicians to have better communication with the teachers of Buddhism to make this happen. In this study, taking these steps would promote the efficacy of Buddhist-derived interventions. Therefore, they collaborated with Buddhist monks in an attempt to preserve meaning of the terms. The researchers also appeared to lean more toward the interpretations of the Dalai Lama, as they believed his interpretations are an embodiment of a worldview that is authentic. What was also brought out is that the Dalai Lama has a history of being cited very often in psychological literature. This study was potentially valuable in the sense that clarity and training is required before the clinician endeavors to use Buddhist-derived interventions in clinical practice. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode of Creative Psychotherapy, in which integration of spirituality into the practice of psychotherapy was discussed. And I look forward to meeting with you again for the next episode.
Thank you for listening to Passionate World Talk Radio. You can listen to this program all over again by going over to https://passionateworldtalkradio.com. You can also hear it on Spotify, Spreaker, Amazon Alexa, AMFM247.com every Tuesday evening between 8 and 9 p.m. YouTube, Facebook Live, LinkedIn, and all the other podcast directories one can find on the internet.